So we're going to talk about the first coinage dies. We're going to talk about how they were made and who made them. And there's some information that will be in this talk that I hope will convince you that pretty much everything you've learned about how the mint worked in the beginning is not true. And I think it's always fun to discover new things. So there's two ways you can make a die. The first is by direct engraving. And you use tools like these. On the left is a graver or a burin. You use those to cut lines, to incise lines. The middle one is a scraper. It's a triangular steel structure with 3 sharpened edges, and you use that to gouge out large areas. And the third one is a burnisher, and the burnisher is used to smooth out roughness. And if you see a tooled coin, these are the tools that are used to tool coins as well. So you make dies and you mess with real coins with the same tools. In addition to make a die, you can use small punches. And I've taken some of the images off of chain and wreath cents and just shown how these punches were made or looked. Here's an E, a chain link, I should say. It's got 2 holes in it, and we'll explain that in a second if you haven't already figured it out. And then there are different leaves, and notice that this leaf is a strawberry leaf, and that strawberry leaf is on the reverse of every wreath cent. So if you own a wreath cent, you own a strawberry leaf, and you don't have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars. Here's what you need to make a chain cent. You need 4 number punches for the date, 2 more of a different size for the denomination, A, B, C, D, E, F, I, L, M, N, O, R, S, T, U, and Y for the letters, a chain link, and you can see that they overlap, and that's why the cutouts had to be in the chain link. That's all you need as far as punches are concerned, and we'll talk more about how the chain dies were made in a bit. Second way to make dies is by making a hub, and we'll talk about how hubbing is done as well. A hub can be a larger design, like, for example, this is a reconstruction of the hub from an 1804 dollar. And you can also have the entire design hubbed. And what this is a reconstruction of the hub that was used for 1794 half cents. They really did make a hub for 1794 half cents. It was not successful. They had to re-engrave so many things on each individual die that they never hubbed a complete die for a half cent again until 1840. They did try to hub some large cents a little after that, and it didn't work any better for that than it did for half cents. Here's an overlay of the 3 dies that were made from that hub, and you may not be able to see it in the back, but you can see that the letters don't match up, although ERICA, the denomination, and uni and half cent actually do match quite well. But the stuff that's up at the top, a lot of the leaves are in different places. They had to do a lot of re-engraving. It took about 4 days to produce a large hub for a coin at that time, 4 to 5 days. And it took about a day to engrave the rest of the die from a hub. Reverses could be done more quickly. They could be done in about a day, because all you're doing is banging in a bunch of letters and leaves, and that didn't take so long. So it just wasn't worthwhile to hub the reverse of a half cent or a large cent in 1790s. So why would you hub a die? It allows dies to be mass produced, saves you time and money, produces more consistent dies and coins, and thereby reduces counterfeiting. So there is every reason to hub dies, every reason to do it. And you might wonder why the mint didn't do it. Well, how do you make a hub? You start with a thing called a matrix, also known as a master die, and this is a real matrix or master die for a half real coin that is in the collection of Ray Williams, and he sent me these pictures and allowed me to use them, and I appreciate that. And you can see that you have an M with a crown. That shows that it's from the Madrid Mint. 1789 is the year that it was made. Here is Carlos IV, who was the king at the time. And down at the bottom is the engraver's name, Sepulveda. You can call this a matrix or a master die. Either term is correct. And that's the size of the coin that would have been produced from this master die. If you look carefully, you can see it's not, but it's not from that master die, but it's the right year and the right size. Here's a side view of it. It's a big chunk of steel. There's a little indent for a chuck key to hold it in place in a vise or something. And this little cross down here is a blacksmith's mark, or at least they believe it to be a blacksmith's mark. Here's how hubbing is done today. These are images from the US Mint. You start with a die blank. It's a cylinder that is at the top cut into a shallow cone. And then you have a hub. The hub looks just exactly like the final coin is supposed to look. It's in relief like the coin. The letters all face the same way as on the coin because that's going to be impressed into the die. You then go to a hubbing press, which squeezes, literally squeezes this working hub into the top of the die blank. It moves a great deal of metal, as you can see, and produces the incus die. And then they machine down the die to make it the right size. So let's talk about 1792. The officers of the Mint, there were only 3 at the time. David Rittenhouse was the director, everybody knows that. Tristram Dalton was the treasurer, and I had a terrible time finding a color picture of him. The picture that you always come up with on the internet is a very grainy black and white image. But this is Tristram Dalton. He had been a senator. He was elected for a 2-year term because when the first senators were elected, they were elected for 2, 4, or 6 years. At the end of the 2-year term, he was not reelected, and he was looking for a job, and he got a job as the treasurer of the Mint. And Henry Voight was the chief coiner pro tem. He was in a temporary appointment. They were trying to hire somebody from Europe to serve as both chief coiner and engraver. And so he was actually in a temporary appointment for quite a while. There are no known pictures of him, unfortunately, because he turns out to be the man who basically put the Mint together. He's really the most important person in the first US Mint. So everyone at the Mint was new to his job. The Mint had no engraver. So who's going to make the dies? Who's going to make the dies? Well, there were several people in 1792 that engraved dies. First one is a guy named Birch, whose first name may or may not have been Robert. They do not know. So if you see it as Robert Birch, maybe, maybe not. And Birch created this cent pattern. This is a beautiful example of it. His name is engraved right at the truncation of the shoulder, and then it's enlarged so you can see it says Birch. Famous coin, Birch cent. It's called the Birch cent because his name is on it. The half dime or half dime or half disme, depending on who you are and what you like, is probably also by the same guy, largely because the style is very, very similar. And we'll come back to this coin in a minute. Joseph Wright, who you heard mentioned a couple of talks ago, if you were here for JK's talk. Joseph Wright created this medal, the Henry Lee Medal, for his valor at Paulus Hook. He also signed it at the truncation of the neck, J. Wright, and I've enlarged that. Henry Voight also made dies in 1792. He created the silver center cent, and this one actually does have a silver plug in it, one of the finest known. And he created this, the dime pattern, or dime or disme, however you want to pronounce it. Now, if we look at the obverses of the half dime and the dime, I want you to just look at the lettering if you can see it. It looks like the letters are much larger on the small coin than on the big coin, doesn't it? Looks like that to me. But they're actually the same size. They're actually made from the exact same font. They're made from the same punches. Here are the reverses. Again, look how big dime looks there versus this. You can layer one right over the other and they're exactly the same. So they used the same punches for the lettering on both of these denominations. And in fact, the same font was used for the 1793 half cents. And then there's this thing. And I say, what is it? It's variously called a cent, a $quarter, and a half eagle. Most people now call it a $quarter pattern because Joseph Wright claimed to have created a $quarter pattern. This is basically a thought that was invented by Don Taxay in the 1960s. Until then, it was held in the US Mint collection as a cent. Now, it does not meet the legal requirements for a cent because it's got an eagle on the back. And cents are not allowed legally to have an eagle on the back. So whatever it was intended to be, it wasn't a cent. The other thing that's interesting about this is that the dies were quite different in size. See the large, it looks like a broad strike on the front. The back is struck normally. So these dies are actually quite different, and we'll talk about that in a second. The coin, and this is from Crosby, from well over 100 years ago. The coin you refer to is in the mint cabinet, is of copper and weighs 175.5 grains. Nothing is certainly known of its history, but it was one of the pieces handed over to the cabinet by the late Adam Eckfeldt, who was connected with the mint from its origin. And as it cannot well be referred to any other source, I feel pretty sure it's a trial piece made at the mint. I have never seen another, the lettering is feeble, and so on. So nobody really knows where this was made. It does appear to be a mint product. Go back to it. It has no denomination. The reverse is 29 millimeters, the obverse is 25.5. A half dollar is 32 millimeters, a quarter 27, a cent 27, a half eagle 25, and a half cent 24.5. So, you know, it could have been a plan for a half dollar and a quarter. It could have been, the obverse could have been for a half eagle. Or it could have even conceivably been for a half cent. But it wasn't just for one coin. At least if it was a really sloppy job. None of the sizes fit. We have no way to know what it is or who made it. 1793. Jefferson was trying to hire someone from Europe to serve as both chief coiner and engraver. The chief coiner was to be paid $1,500 a year. The engraver was to be paid $1,200 a year. And they figured if they could hire one person to do both jobs, they could save $1,200 a year. And that's exactly what they were trying to do. They worked to get this guy, Jean-Pierre Droz, who at one time had worked in Paris and was working in Birmingham, England at the time. And he jerked him around for about a year and never came. Jefferson gave up in June. In July, Washington and Jefferson decided to give Joseph Wright a recess appointment as engraver. This is Joseph Wright and his family. This is a painting, at least part of which he did. This is him, his wife, and they had 3 little children. These two were twins, or at least we assume they were twins because they were born in the same year. They could have been Irish twins, I suppose. Unfortunately, Wright died on, of all days, Friday the 13th of September of 1793, and his wife died about the same time. And there was actually a notice in the newspaper about Wright's death. It mentioned nothing about him working for the mint. There are no records of the appointment of Wright as engraver. There are no letters, no official documents from the government confirming this appointment. However, Washington and Jefferson both referred to him after his death as our engraver, and we have to replace our engraver. So there may be something somewhere, but nobody has found it. Elias Boudinot, who was the second director of the Mint, was a congressman in 1793, or in 1795 when this was done, and he was leading the charge to abolish the Mint. So he got himself appointed to a committee as the chair of the committee, and they were going to go down to the Mint and they were going to find out what is wrong with these people, why they can't make enough coins, why we're spending all this money and we're not getting money in circulation. He was going to go down there and he was going to destroy the place. And he came to discover that the reason the Mint wasn't producing much was because Congress wasn't funding them enough. And so he came back to Congress and he told them what they needed to do. And one of the things he said was, it was a considerable time before an engraver could be engaged, during which the chief coiner was obliged to make the dies for himself. So we're back to Henry Voight. He was the chief coiner. He was not a trained artist. He was, however, a really talented guy. He was kind of a polymath. A clockmaker. He made the engine for the first practical US steamboat. He made surveying instruments. He was a good friend of Rittenhouse and Jefferson. He even created a new religion that he called the Universal Society, in which you did good works because it was the right thing to do, not because if you didn't, you would be divinely punished. It didn't last long. So here are some of the coins that he created. 1793 chain cent. Wouldn't you guys like to have this one? It's one of the finest amorais, maybe the finest amorai. Here's a nice wreath. It's got some strawberry leaves back here. A red-brown wreath. How many of those are there? 1793 half cent from the Missouri cabinet. All of these dies were supposed to have been hand engraved, and if you read any book, they will tell you that these dies were hand engraved. And until about a little more than a year ago, that was believed to be true. I say, but were they? A rational belief demands the test of a preliminary doubt. This is Archibald S. Cooper, Esquire, from 1858. I used to have this on a poster in my lab that I wanted my students to look at, because as a scientist, we teach everybody to question everything. And we wanted our students to question everything. The poster actually had a guy dressed up for winter. It's really cold. He's wearing a scarf and a big hat, but he's got one foot out of his boot and he's sticking his toe in the water. A rational belief demands the test of a preliminary doubt. And I was thinking that these two faces, these are the two 1793 half-cent obverses. Those faces look a lot alike. The hair doesn't. Hair is very different. The Liberty caps are very different. But those faces sure look a lot alike. So what I did was overlay these in Photoshop in yellow and cyan, because the colors are quite different. And you can see that the face, the entire bust, from the ear, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the chin, the throat, the bust line, everything matches perfectly. The hair does not. The Liberty cap does not. So these coins were hubbed. In other words, these were not hand engraved. The hair was hand engraved. The cap was hand engraved. The poles, you can see there's two poles, those were hand engraved. But Liberty's face was not. So the question is, was this hub created for 1793 half cents, or did it already exist? Again, why would you think it would previously exist? The problem is the 1792 dime pattern looks a lot like that half cent, doesn't it? Look at the two faces side by side. They look a lot alike. And this was actually noted by Crosby in his big book. He commented on that. Nobody ever commented on it again until Walter Breen in 1954. He said the resemblance was remarkable. And he said it proved that they were by the same hand. In other words, the same engraver did these two. But he didn't go any further than that. Well, why would they hub a dime from 1792? It was a pattern, wasn't intended for coinage. There are 22 known in copper, about half of which circulated, probably as half cents because they were the right size. If 10% of the half dimes survive, then that suggests that fewer than 250 dimes were ever made, all from the same die pair. So why would you hub something that's going to be used for a pattern that's only going to be used briefly like that? A rational belief demands the test of a preliminary doubt. And if we take these and overlay them, once again, the face is the same, the forehead, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the chin, even the jawline, the ear, the neck, the bust line, exactly the same. This is one of those discoveries that was out there in front of everybody for 225 years, and nobody noticed it. Liberty from the two dies is also, again, the same font. So here's the hub that created those three dies. We don't know what was back here, so I've kind of grayed that out. But you can see the face, the eye, the ear, the nose, the mouth, and so on. Everything is exactly the same. The dime and the half cent were from the same hub. So Voight created a hub in 1792, reused it for another denomination in 1793. Who would expect that? Well, why did Voight create a hub? We can only speculate, but Jefferson was trying to hire one person to take both jobs. Voight wanted the job. He didn't have another job. He was trying to show what he could do and how better to do it than to create a hub in 1792 and use it, especially to reuse it in 1793. Again, this is speculation. I don't know that that's true, but nothing else makes sense to me. Did he hub anything else? Well, we know the chain wreath and liberty cap cents were struck before the half cents, so were any of those hubbed? I did an overlay with the chain dies, and this is S1 over S4, and you can see that I've aligned the chins, but the eyes, the ears, the nose, the throat, and the bust line are all completely different. So these were not produced from the same hub. And I've done these overlays with all four chain dies, and they are all individually hand engraved. None of them were hubbed. These are also in very low relief, unlike the half cent or the dime that you saw. And in a way, it looks like these were maybe some kind of a rush job. They were just trying to get these out so that they could get something out in February of 1793. The chain obverses were hand engraved. How about the wreaths? This is S9, 10, and 11 overlay. The hair is very psychedelic because the hair is a little different in each die, but the faces and the bust lines are exactly the same, just like with the half cents. Here's one that nobody has seen because I hadn't published this before. This is S6 and NC3. It's a strawberry leaf, and it's dark, but there's a strawberry leaf right there. And the strawberry leaf is in wretched condition. It's all terribly corroded. But to the extent that you can tell, it does line up with the others. So in all likelihood, all of the wreaths were made from the same hub. And this is sort of one more nail in the coffin of the notion that the strawberry leaves were not a mint product. There's lots of other evidence that it was a mint product, but this is sort of one more nail in that coffin. So the wreath cents were hubbed. And that's what the hub looked like. Here's a 1793 Liberty Cap cent, Dane's favorite coin. This is the finest known S13. The finest known 1793 Liberty Cap cent is the hub that created it. It does have the pole, it does have the cap, unlike the half cent hub that was used, because the half cent hub was made for something else. So that coin is usually attributed to Wright, but unfortunately Wright was not paid for any work at the mint in 1793. I worked for the government both as a contractor and as an employee at different times, and I know that if you work for the government, they pay you. And I'm sure that was the same in 1793. He asked that his estate be paid for the Henry Lee medal. He asked on his deathbed, in fact, 2 days before he died. They did not pay him until after he died. It was paid. It was paid 50 guineas or $233.33. He asked that his estate be paid for a $quarter pattern that broke in hardening. It was not paid for that, which is another reason to suspect that that eagle on globe piece is not his $quarter pattern. And he asked to be paid for nothing else. If he had done any work for the mint in 1793, he would have been paid, and he was not. November 23rd of 1793, Robert Scott was hired as engraver, but all of the 1793 cents and half cents had already been delivered. So Robert Scott had nothing to do with it. Henry Voight designed and engraved all of the 1793s.